At first, style was almost an afterthought for HTML. Then, as the need for the ability to highlight or emphasize text became evident, bits and pieces of style markup elements began to make their appearance. Eventually, the style element became a handy tool. In this video, we formally introduce some style markup elements, and then we explore style properties, style attributes, and style elements. We also introduce the class attribute, which gives us a way to assign multiple style properties to multiple elements. The trick is to keep them all straight. At first, markup to enhance text was done with new elements, and even though the trend has been to focus on attributes, these elements are still supported today. In fact, it is often easier to use these markup elements than to use the style attributes and elements we'll introduce shortly, just not as flexible. These classic markup elements are intended to indicate text emphasis for strings of text within other text elements, such as paragraphs and headers, so they're usually nested within these. For all these elements, the start tag and end tag are required, and their content is just text. The B element says the content text should be bold. The I element says set the text to be italic. The mark element says to highlight in order to bring attention. Typically, it's implemented as a yellow background, as if a marker had been run over the text. The S element says show the text with a line through it, called strike through. The sub element indicates the text is a subscript. It's implemented as a small text size and below the normal text line, whereas the sup element indicates the text is a superscript, like a power in mathematics, and that's implemented as a small text size and higher than the normal text line. Finally, the U element indicates the text should be underlined. While global attributes are available, it is not customary to use them for these elements. And similarly for events, you can code event handlers for these elements, but it is rare. These elements may be nested within each other, in which case they are additive, such as bold italic or underline italic. Here's an example. This HTML code generates this HTML web page. Let's take a brief look at it. We start out with the H1 tag, which gives us sort of a title effect, testing markup elements. And then a paragraph tag, and this text starts out with the default, and then you'll notice we switch to bold, and after a while it adds the underline, so now we have underline bold, and then it stops the underline, so we're just back to plain bold, and then we demonstrate the superscript capability, and then we drop out of bold altogether, so fall back to normal, and then we switch to strike through, after which it goes to italics, out of that, and then demonstrate the mark element, and then finally ends. Note that there are other markup elements, but these are the most likely to be useful, and in fact, I rarely use any of these except B for bold and U for underline. Now, before we discuss properties, we need to discuss the kinds of values that properties can have. It might be a reserved word. You select from a choice. In our notation, we will show you the choices separated by vertical bars, read as the word OR. Do not code the vertical bars, just choose one from the list. For example, one of, solid, or, dotted, or, dashed. Note that the reserved word inherit means use the value of the owning or containing element. The reserved word auto means automatically calculate based on the context. And reserved word values are always case insensitive. Property value could be a color value from a list of reserved color names or specified as a triplet of numbers such as RGB, specifying how much red, green, and blue makes up the color, and even other ways. The definitive source is w3.org/tr/css-color-3. You can have a length value, and that can be specified as an absolute length, a percentage, or a relative length. Absolute lengths are specified by a number followed by a unit of measurement, and here's the allowed units. IN for inches, cm for centimeters, 100th of a meter, mm for millimeters, 1,000th of a meter, pt for point, 1 point is a 1/72nd of an inch, pc for pica, 1 pica is 12 points, and px for pixel. 1 pixel is about 0.75 points. Or a length as a percentage, it's a number followed by the percent sign. The percentage is of the containing element. Relative lengths are font-based. EM says what's the font size of the relevant font. EX, what's the X height of the relevant font. Note, in these courses, we'll stick with PT, PX, EM, and percent. Now this describes a length type value. Width values use length type values also. In addition to the inline markup elements just discussed, all HTML elements support a style attribute, which applies a set of style properties. Before we talk about style attributes, then, we discuss the most common and useful style properties. We divide style properties into two broad categories, text formatting and page layout. We discuss text formatting properties in this video and page layout in a later video. Text formatting is all about look and feel, color, font properties, and the like. Here are the most useful and common text formatting properties. Color-related properties, background-color, what's the color of the background, or just color, which is what's the color of the foreground or the text. Font-related properties, the font family, specify one as a family name such as Helvetica, Courier New, and so on, or a generic family name, one of serif or sans serif or cursive or fantasy or monospace. The font family value may be specified as a comma-separated list of names of these two types. For example, font family : space, quote, New Century School Book, quote, comma, Gill, comma, sans serif. The recommendation is to quote font names that contain spaces. The browser will search for the fonts in the order you specify and use the first match or best fit. Font style property is one of normal or italic or oblique or inherit. Font variant is one of small caps or normal or inherit. Font size is a length value. Font weight is one of bold or normal or bolder or lighter or 100 or 200 all the way up to 900 or inherit. Other text-related properties, text align is one of left or right or center or justify or inherit. Text decoration is one of underline, overline, or line through or blink. Text indent is a length type value, and text transform is one of capitalize, uppercase, lowercase, inherit. In the start tag of elements, you may include a style attribute. The syntax is style equals quote property name colon space property value end quote. For example, a P element with style equals background color colon fuchsia quote. A style attribute may have multiple properties separated with semicolon space. For example, in this P element we say style equals quote font weight colon bold semicolon space text decoration colon overline semicolon quote. The final property value does not need a semicolon, but it is acceptable to code it. In fact, life is simpler if you always end the value with a semicolon. Just to be clear, the properties list can cross line boundaries. For example, here we have a P element, style equals, quote, text align colon center semicolon space, font weight colon normal semicolon, new line, text transform colon lowercase semicolon close quote. So, to summarize, all elements can include a style attribute, which is composed of a series of style properties with their assigned style values. Now, if you needed to code style attributes for every element, or even many elements, coding would get very tedious very fast. And it dawned on the standards developers that it would be smart to separate content from style as much as possible. So they introduced a style element for placement within the head element as a way to assign a collection of style attributes to whole types of elements, all P elements, say, or all H3 elements. The purpose is to define rules for assignments of style properties. And the syntax, within the head element, we have a style element, possibly with some attributes, and a set of style rules. Possibly useful global attributes, none. But there is a useful non-global attribute, media, and that designates which type of media this set of style rules is for. Possible values are print, or screen, or speech, or all, and the default value is all. Using this attribute, you can set up separate style rules for different types of media. So, what are these mysterious style rules? Simple, yet complex. You specify a selector followed by a declaration block, which is a set of braces containing one or more style properties. The selectors identify which items are to have the properties specified in the declaration block. Here we go through some possible selectors. If you specify a selector that is an element name, then all elements of that type will have those properties. For example, in this style element, we say P, so that means all the P-type elements, paragraphs, should have font weight bold and font size 12 point. So in this case, all P elements in the page will automatically use 12-point bold. A selector can be a comma-separated list of element names, in which case all elements of those types will have those style properties. In this example, we see H2, comma, H3, and then the declaration block, color blue, text decoration, underline. In this situation, all H2 and H3 elements will appear as underlined blue text. A selector can be a space-separated list of element names, in which case the properties only apply to nested sets of those elements. For example, we see H1, mark, color fuchsia. This says that any mark element nested within an H1 element will have text color set to fuchsia. A selector can be an element name followed by a period and then a style rule name. Note, you create this style rule name. Here we show H1 dot first, so that's the style rule name. We're naming that rule. It's text aligned center, color red, font size 14 point. And then another entry for H1, but this is style rule named other, and its text align is left and color green. Then in the body of the document, you code this name in the class attribute of elements that you want to have those style attributes. For example, H1 class equals first. This header will be red and centered. And H1 class equals other, this header will be green and left aligned. Whereas just H1 without a class element will take the default or inherited properties. Note, we've just introduced and defined the class attribute, a list of one or more style rule names. Or a class name is a style rule name. A selector can be a period followed by a class name. In this case, you can use this style class for any element. In this example, we have class name red and bold 12 and under. Then, for any element, you could include one or more of these classes. So here we have H1 class equals bold 12, or a paragraph with class equals red, or P class equals quote under space bold 12 quote. Important note, if you have two or more values in a class attribute, they must be separated by one or more spaces and bounded by quotes, either single quotes or double quotes. A selector can identify a single specific element in the body by referencing the ID of that element, preceded by a pound sign or hashtag. In this example, we see that all paragraphs by default will now be red unless their class is green, in which case it will be green. And the single item in the whole page with an ID of blues will be color blue. So in the body, you might code, this paragraph will be red, and indeed it will, because that's the default way we set the classes up. This paragraph, ID equals blues, since ID is unique within a page, it will only be this paragraph that will be blue. And then the next is a regular paragraph, so it will also be red. And the next is a paragraph with class equals green, so this paragraph will be green. You can have multiple style elements in your head element. Your browser will blend them and make decisions about how to handle any contradictory values. A powerful aspect of style elements is the ability to define different style rules depending on the media type. In this example, we have two style elements, the first media equals screen and the second media equal print. So now, if the document is displayed, H1 elements will show up as blue and presumably left aligned. But if the document is printed, H1 elements will show up as centered using the default color assignment. As you might imagine, style elements can get quite large. I find it helps to group the style rules within a style element as follows. First, rules that have element names as selectors. Put them alphabetically by the element name. If there are multiple classes within an element selector, alphabetize by class name within element name. Next, rules that have selectors based on an ID, hashtag ID value, alphabetized by that ID value. And then finally, rules whose selectors are just class names, that is, just .name, alphabetized by the class name. Well, we've covered a lot of material. Text markup elements, B, I, mark, S, sub, sup, and U. Style property values, reserved words, color, lengths. And style properties, text formatting type anyway, background color, color, font family, font style, font variant, font size, font weight, and text align, text decoration, text indent, and text transform. We introduced the style attribute in start tags within the body and the style element in the head tag, composed of style rules, which are selector declaration block sets. Selectors we found can be an element name, or a comma-separated list of element names, or a space-separated list of element names, or an element name dot class name, or just a dot class name, or just a pound sign with an ID value. And incidentally, we introduced or defined the class attribute. We saw how the media attribute of the style element can be used to provide different characteristics for elements depending on their intended outputs. Next up, we examine some additional elements that provide some transition between content and formatting, span, div, and HR. And we discuss how to line up text in columns. See you there.